I was 32 years old the first time I went camping alone. I'd always gone with friends or family, but that year I wanted the quiet. No talking, no schedules, just me, my gear, and the outdoors. It was the summer of 2017. I had flown into France a week earlier, spending time in the city before heading out toward the countryside. I rented a small car and drove south, eventually ending up near the Pyrenees, where the forests stretched endlessly. My plan was simple: camp for 3 nights in the woods, enjoy the solitude, and hike the trails. I found a spot not too far from a small village, the kind of place where the locals eye you with mild curiosity but say little. The woman who ran the only store in town sold me some food, a few extra batteries, and pointed me toward the best trails. My French was bad, her English was worse, but I got the gist. There were trails leading into the forest, places where people rarely went. That was exactly what I wanted. I drove a few miles out of town, parked near a dirt path, and hiked about 2 hours into the woods before I set up camp. It was a good spot, flat near a small stream, and surrounded by trees thick enough to provide some cover but open enough that I could see around me. The first night was uneventful. I cooked a simple meal, sat by the fire, and listened to the sounds of the forest. Also, the rustling of small animals, the occasional crack of a branch. Normal things. It wasn't until the second night that I noticed something was off. That evening, I had been out hiking for a while. When I got back to camp, the first thing I noticed was that something felt different. The air had changed, not colder, just still. The birds had stopped, and the usual forest sounds had faded. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as my imagination, but then I saw it. The footprint. It was near my tent, pressed deep into the dirt, too deep to be old. It hadn't been there when I left. It wasn't mine. I stared at it for a long time. The size was hard to tell exactly, but it was bigger than my own boot. Someone had been here. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement. No sound. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to be logical. Maybe a hunter. Maybe another camper. Maybe even just someone passing through. But if that were the case, why so close to my tent? I forced myself to stay calm, but I couldn't ignore the unease in my stomach. I checked my gear. Everything was still there. Nothing stolen, nothing moved. That almost made it worse. If someone had taken something, at least it would make sense. I built my fire bigger than usual that night. Not because I was cold, but because I wanted the light. The forest was dark, the kind of dark you don't get in cities. I ate, kept my knife close, and listened. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a sound. A branch breaking, not far from my tent. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. The fire had burned lower, casting long shadows. I listened. Another sound, closer this time. A soft, deliberate crunching of leaves. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on, shining it toward the noise. Nothing, just trees. But then, just as I was about to turn it off, I caught movement. A shape, barely visible behind a thick tree trunk, maybe 30 feet away. I froze. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He didn't move at first, just stood there half hidden. I could barely make out his face in the dim light, but I saw enough. Scruffy, maybe in his 40s or 50s, wearing dark clothes. His posture was unnatural, too still, too rigid, like he was waiting, watching. I didn't say anything, just stared. My mind raced. Who was he? What did he want? Was he alone? Then slowly he took a step back. Another. Then he turned and melted into the trees. I listened for a long time, but I didn't hear him anymore. I stayed up the rest of the night, fire blazing, knife in my hand. Every sound made my skin crawl. I wanted to pack up and leave right then, but I told myself it was just a random guy, maybe a hiker who didn't realize he was near my camp. Maybe. By morning, I was exhausted, but I convinced myself I had overreacted. I told myself I'd stay one more night. That was a mistake. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake the unease, but it never fully left me. By the time I got back to camp that evening, I noticed something else. Small things. The pile of wood I had gathered had been moved slightly. My backpack, which I had left zipped, was open just a little. Not much, but enough. Someone had been here. I felt sick. This time, I didn't wait. I packed up quickly, shoving everything into my bag as fast as I could. I wasn't staying another night. The hike back to my car was the longest of my life. The whole way I felt watched. I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning the trees. A few times I thought I saw movement, but I never got a clear look. When I finally reached my car, I threw my gear inside and locked the doors. I sat there for a while, catching my breath, heart hammering. Then I started the engine and drove. Fast. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in the village. I got a room in a small inn, locked the door, and stayed inside for the rest of the night. The next morning, I went back to the shop where I had bought my supplies. The woman was there, the same one who had helped me before. I hesitated, then asked her, casually, if anyone else had been camping out in those woods. She gave me a strange look and shook her head. No one goes out there, she said. I left that day, drove back to the city, caught my flight home, and never went back. I still think about it sometimes. The man in the trees, the footprints, the way he just watched. What would have happened if I had stayed one more night? If I had fallen asleep? I don't go camping alone anymore. I never thought much about my boss outside of work. I never had to. He was just another man in a suit, walking through the office with that tight-lipped expression, handing out tasks and barely making eye contact. He wasn't the worst boss I ever had, but something about him felt off. It wasn't just the way he looked at people, either long, lingering stares that felt like he was memorizing every inch of you. It was more than that. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he always seemed to be just a little too close. But none of that mattered much to me. I did my job, I collected my paycheck, and I kept my head down. That was until he invited me on the camping trip. First, I thought it was a joke. I wasn't exactly the type to go out with coworkers, let alone my boss. But he insisted. He told me he had a private spot deep in the woods, a place nobody knew about. He said he could show me the kind of peace I'd never experienced before. And he wasn't asking, not really. So I went. It was early September, still warm during the day but cold at night. He picked me up in his truck on a Friday after work, a long ride ahead of us. I didn't even know exactly where we were going, only that it was somewhere in Montana, hours away from the nearest town. The drive was quiet at first. He didn't say much, just stared at the road with that same blank expression he always had. I watched the trees blur past the window, the road stretching endlessly into the wilderness. There were no other cars, no signs, nothing but trees and mountains in the distance. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke. "You ever go hunting?" I shook my head. I wasn't against it or anything, just never had the chance. He smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was too slow, like he had to think about how to do it. "You'll learn." Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. We finally reached the campsite just before sunset. It wasn't like any campsite I'd ever seen. No marked trails, no fire pits, no other people. Just a clearing in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick trees and silence. His truck was the only vehicle for miles. I helped him set up the tent, which was bigger than I expected, one of those military-style canvas tents. Inside, there were 2 sleeping bags, a cooler, and a pile of supplies. No cell service, no way to contact anyone. He built a fire, and we sat in the glow of it, eating canned food in silence. The only sound was the crackling flames and the occasional rustling in the trees. Then he pulled out a knife, a big one. He started sharpening it, running the blade across a whetstone slowly, methodically. He didn't look at me while he did it, just kept his eyes on the knife. The sound of metal scraping filled the silence. "Got a lot of bears out here," he finally said. "You gotta be ready for him." I nodded, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something. Breathing that wasn't mine, footsteps outside the tent, the sound of the knife against the whetstone again, even though I knew he'd put it away. The next morning, he woke me up early, said we were going hunting. He handed me a rifle, old but well-maintained. I wasn't comfortable holding it, but I didn't argue. We walked deep into the woods, further than I thought we needed to. There were no trails, no markers, just endless trees and the sound of our footsteps crunching through the undergrowth. After a while, he stopped, looked around, smiled that slow, unnatural smile again. Then he said, "Run." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. His face didn't change. "Run," he repeated, his voice flat. "See how far you can get." I stared at him, my stomach twisting into knots. He raised his rifle, not aiming at me, not yet, but the message was clear. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran, crashing through the trees, branches whipping against my face. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps slow and steady, like he wasn't in any hurry. I don't know how long I ran. Time didn't make sense anymore. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. Then I heard the gunshot. The bullet hit a tree near me, bark exploding in my face. I kept running. Another shot, closer this time. I tripped, fell hard. My hands hit the dirt, and I scrambled to get up. Then I heard him laugh. Not loud, not like he was enjoying himself. Just a small, quiet chuckle, like he was amused, like this was a game. I forced myself up and kept moving, trying to think, trying to remember anything about survival, about hiding, about making it out of here alive. I found a fallen tree and crawled under it, pressing myself into the dirt, trying to slow my breathing. Silence, then footsteps, slow, deliberate. He was close. I could see his boots through the gaps in the branches. He stopped, just stood there, listening. Then he whispered, so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. "You're not the first." I didn't move, didn't breathe. Eventually, he walked away. I stayed hidden for hours, maybe longer. My body ached, my head pounded, but I didn't move until I was sure he was gone. When I finally crawled out, the forest was dark. I had no idea where I was, no idea which way led to safety, but I didn't care. I just kept moving. Took me 2 days to find a road. 2 days of hunger, exhaustion, paranoia. But I made it. A trucker picked me up, drove me to the nearest town. I told the police everything. They searched the area. They found the campsite, the tent, the fire pit, my backpack. But not him. They never found him. And when they looked into his background, they found nothing. No real name, no records, no past, like he never existed. But I know he does, and I know he's still out there, waiting for the next person to say yes. It was the kind of late summer evening that left the air thick and muggy, the kind where the last remnants of the day's heat refused to let go, and the scent of pine trees and damp soil wrapped around everything. I didn't mind it. I liked the quiet, the isolation. I'd been planning this camping trip for months, a week away from everything. No distractions, no work, no noise, just me, my tent, and the woods. I set out early that morning from my small apartment in Boulder, Colorado. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, but I knew I wanted to go somewhere remote. I was 32 years old, and in the years leading up to this trip, I developed a deep need for solitude. The world around me had become too loud, too overwhelming. I wanted to get away from all of it. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was around midday, and the sun was starting to climb higher. The air felt dry, almost desert-like in the way it pressed down on everything. I pulled my old, worn-out backpack from the trunk of my car. It had everything I'd need: a tarp, a sleeping bag, a stove, food for a week, and of course a flashlight. I wasn't planning on being out there for more than a few days, but I knew I'd be walking a lot. The trail itself wasn't difficult, but it wasn't exactly easy either. It wound up through the pines, the earth beneath my boots shifting between packed dirt and loose gravel. The path was overgrown in places, and I had to keep my eyes on the ground to avoid tripping over roots or slipping. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees and the distant calls of birds. I pushed forward. There wasn't another soul around, not that I minded. I preferred the quiet, the freedom of being entirely alone. It wasn't until the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the trail, that I started looking for a place to camp. I came across a clearing with a small creek running through it, the water clear and cold. It wasn't too far from the trail, but it was tucked away enough that it felt private. I'd seen no signs of other campers, and that was perfect. After setting up my tent, I gathered some dry wood for a fire, and as the sky grew darker, I lit it. Sitting there on a log, watching the flames dance, I felt a sense of peace. It had been a long time since I'd had this kind of stillness. The world around me seemed to vanish as I stared into the fire, my mind drifting. But then, somewhere in the distance, I heard a sound, a crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rustling of an animal. It was too deliberate. My body tensed. I tried to convince myself that it was just a deer or something else harmless, but the sound didn't quite match up. The crack wasn't followed by the usual rustle of leaves, the way it should have been. It was too heavy, too intentional. My mind raced, but I didn't let myself panic. I glanced around the camp, making sure everything was in place. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. Still, the sound lingered, like someone knew something was out there watching. I spent the next few minutes staring into the trees, listening for another sound, but nothing came. The crack had been distant, and the woods were quiet again. I tried to push it out of my mind, telling myself it was just an animal. Maybe a bear, maybe a person out for a walk on the trail. But that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The fire crackled and popped, and I stoked it for a few more minutes, hoping the warmth and light would ease the sense of unease that had settled over me. But the woods felt different now. The night had deepened, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if they were alive, moving in the dark. I got into my tent, zipping it shut, though I knew that wouldn't offer much protection if something decided to come for me. I rolled over onto my sleeping pad, but sleep didn't come easy. Every slight sound from outside the tent made me jump. The wind, the rustling of leaves, the snap of another twig, all of it made my heart race. Time crawled by. Hours? Minutes? Couldn't tell. It was so quiet that the stillness began to press against my ears. The air felt thicker now, almost suffocating. I turned on my flashlight, shining it briefly through the thin fabric of the tent. Nothing moved in the darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. At some point, I dozed off, but it wasn't a restful sleep. My mind kept drifting back to that noise, the crack of a branch. What could it have been? Was it someone? I thought of calling out, but the thought of breaking the silence felt like a mistake. And then, just as I started to drift into a deeper sleep, I heard it again. A crack, closer this time. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. It wasn't an animal. No bear would make that kind of noise. No deer would walk so close to camp. There was someone out there. But why? Who? The night dragged on, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional snap of a branch. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I opened my eyes again, it was morning. The sun was still low in the sky, and the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. I felt exhausted. I hadn't slept, not really. The nerves from the night before still ran through me like electricity. I unzipped the tent slowly, scanning the area around me. The campsite seemed undisturbed. No tracks, no signs that anyone had been near, but the hairs on the back of my neck still stood up. Something was off. I spent the rest of the morning checking my gear, making sure everything was where I left it. I went to the creek to get water and made myself a simple breakfast. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of unease. Whoever or whatever had been out there the night before wasn't gone. I decided to pack up and leave. I couldn't stand the tension any longer. The woods were beautiful, but they felt too alive, too aware of me. As I packed my things, I realized just how foolish I'd been. I hadn't been careful. I hadn't noticed the signs, the subtle things that didn't belong. The second I put my backpack on, I spotted something in the dirt, a set of prints. They were large, not like a human's, more like something else, something heavy. The prints were deep, as if the ground had been disturbed by something that didn't belong. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't need to see more. I didn't need to investigate further. I was done. With my heart still racing, I turned and walked back down the trail, moving faster now, leaving the clearing behind. I didn't look back. When I finally reached my car, I slammed the door shut and drove off without a second thought. The woods receded in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't shake the feeling. What had been out there? What had I almost stumbled into? I never did find out, and I didn't need to. As the days passed, I tried to push the thoughts of the woods to the back of my mind, but it lingered. The thought of something or someone watching, and the tracks. I could still see them clearly in my mind, so fresh in the dirt. It's been months since that trip, but sometimes, when I'm walking through the woods, I feel the same uneasy sensation. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, and I can't help but wonder, was I just overreacting? Or did I narrowly escape something I couldn't understand? I'll never know, but I don't think I'll be camping alone in those woods again. The rain started early, just as I was setting up my tent. It wasn't heavy yet, just a light drizzle tapping against the tarp as I worked. I had hiked out here alone, deep into the dense forests of northern Washington, miles from any road or trailhead. I had been camping alone for years, and I had always preferred it that way. No noise, no people, just the quiet of the woods. But there was nothing quiet about tonight. The wind was picking up, rustling through the trees, sending droplets down from the branches. The sky had been gray all day, thick with the kind of clouds that made it feel like evening even in the middle of the afternoon. I had checked the forecast before coming out. Rain was expected, but nothing serious. Just a chilly, damp night in the woods. I had dealt with worse. I set up my tent quickly, making sure everything was secure, then gathered wood for a fire. The ground was already damp, and I knew keeping a fire going would be a struggle, but I wanted the warmth. The temperature was dropping fast, and the dampness made it feel even colder. My fingers were already stiff from the chill by the time I got the fire lit, the orange glow flickering against the wet darkness. I sat beside the fire, eating a cold sandwich I had packed earlier, listening to the rain picking up. The sound of it on the trees and leaves was steady, constant, drowning out everything else. My headlamp cast a dim light around my small clearing, but beyond that, it was just darkness. Thick, heavy, endless darkness stretching out in every direction. I had been in the woods at night plenty of times, but there was something different about it in the rain. The way the sound swallowed everything, the way the wet cold seeped into your bones, the way the wind moved through the trees like something alive. After I finished eating, I sat for a while, staring into the fire, letting my mind drift. I didn't have cell service out here, but I wasn't expecting to. I had planned on just a quiet night alone before heading back in the morning. Just me, the rain, and the trees. Then I heard something. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the rain, just a soft rustling in the distance. I told myself it was just the wind, just the rain moving the branches. But then it came again, closer, more distinct. Footsteps, not the scattered, uneven noise of a deer moving through the brush, not the quick scurry of a small animal. These were slow, steady footsteps, careful, deliberate, someone walking. I turned my headlamp toward the sound, but the light barely cut through the rain and darkness. I couldn't see anything beyond the first few rows of trees. My breath had gone still, my whole body frozen, listening. Nothing, just the rain. I waited. The fire crackled beside me. Rain hissed against the flames, but the footsteps were gone. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the way it sometimes does when you're alone in the woods at night. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling stuck with me. The uneasy prickle at the back of my neck. The instinctive awareness that I wasn't alone. I stayed by the fire longer than I had planned, letting it burn lower, listening. The rain had gotten heavier now, a steady downpour drumming against the tent and the leaves. I kept my headlamp on, scanning the trees every now and then, but I saw nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing, just my imagination, just the sounds of the forest in the rain. I put out the fire, crawled into my tent, and zipped myself into my sleeping bag, listening to the rain beating against the fabric. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up suddenly to a different sound. Not the rain, not the wind, something moving, right outside my tent. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. The sound was slow, careful. Footsteps, again, close, too close. I reached for my flashlight, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal. Slowly, I turned it on, the beam illuminating the thin walls of my tent. The sound stopped. Silence. I stayed still, my ears straining. Then, just outside, I heard the faintest sound. Breathing. Someone was standing outside my tent. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just lay there, heart pounding, flashlight shaking slightly in my grip. I couldn't see anything outside. The rain and the darkness swallowed everything. But I knew they were there, just beyond the thin fabric. For what felt like forever, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the rain, the wind, my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then, slowly, the sound of footsteps again, moving away this time. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just lay there, listening, waiting, every sound making my pulse spike. When the first light of morning finally broke through the trees, I unzipped my tent slowly and looked out. The ground was soaked, puddles forming in the low spots, mud slick under my boots. My fire pit was a mess of wet ashes. The trees dripped with rainwater, and then I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. They circled my tent, stopped right at the entrance, then moved away, vanishing into the woods. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, my hands shaking the whole time. My knife was in my hand the entire time. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop for anything. I just walked. Fast. I didn't run, but I wanted to. Every step, I expected to hear someone behind me. Every turn in the trail, I expected to see someone watching, but I never saw anyone. By the time I made it back to my truck, I was soaked to the bone, exhausted, shaking, but I didn't care. I threw my gear in the back, climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment, trying to breathe. I don't know who was out there with me. I don't know what they wanted, but I know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone that night, and I'll never go camping alone again. I was 17 the summer my cousin Aaron and I went camping in the woods near a lake about an hour outside of Traverse City, Michigan. It was the kind of summer where the heat clung to your skin even at night, and the bugs were relentless. Aaron was a year older than me, taller, leaner, and had always been the kind of guy who wasn't scared of much. I wasn't exactly a coward, but I wasn't as confident as him when it came to spending nights out in the middle of nowhere. We planned the trip for a Friday through Sunday, bringing enough supplies to last us comfortably. A tent, sleeping bags, a couple of knives, some fishing gear, and a cooler packed with food and drinks. I had an old flashlight with a dimming beam, and Aaron had a headlamp that looked a lot more reliable. We also brought a small hatchet for firewood and a metal camp stove in case we couldn't get a fire going. We parked the truck at a dirt pull-off just off a 2-lane highway. The woods weren't part of any official camping grounds, just a stretch of forest around a secluded lake, surrounded by private land but not technically off-limits. We had to hike about a mile in, carrying all our gear through thick brush and uneven ground. The place was quiet except for the distant chirping of birds and the occasional rustling in the trees from squirrels or maybe something bigger, like a deer. The lake was calm and still, its surface like glass under the evening sun. We found a decent spot to set up camp, right near the water's edge. The ground was soft but firm, and there was already an old fire ring from past campers. We pitched the tent quickly, unrolled our sleeping bags, and set up a makeshift area to prepare food. That first night was uneventful, though I woke up a few times to sounds outside the tent. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, the usual noises that always seem a little more sinister in the dark. Aaron slept through everything, barely moving. I figured it was just the wind or some animal passing by. The next morning, we fished off a small wooden dock someone had built long ago. The water was murky, but we managed to catch a few bluegill and a decent-sized bass. We gutted them by the shore and cooked them over the fire, eating straight from the pan with our knives. The day was hot, the kind of heat that makes you feel sluggish. We spent most of the afternoon swimming and exploring the woods, but something felt off. It was subtle at first, just a creeping unease that I couldn't explain. The woods felt too quiet. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement between the trees, a shadow shifting, something ducking just out of sight. I told myself it was nothing. Animals, probably. Maybe another camper. But the feeling didn't go away. Late that afternoon, we came across something that made my skin crawl. A little ways into the woods, we found a deer carcass. It was fresh, but something about it wasn't right. The body was torn open, ribs exposed, and the meat looked like it had been stripped in thick, uneven chunks. This wasn't the work of a hunter or even a scavenger. It looked violent. Aaron crouched down, inspecting it. There were no bullet holes, no clean cuts, just torn flesh, deep scratches. Something had ripped this thing apart. Bear? I asked, even though the word felt wrong in my mouth. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the carcass, his jaw tight. Then he stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Let's get back to camp," he said. The walk back felt longer. The air was thick, heavy, like a storm was coming, though the sky was clear. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following us. That night, things got worse. We built up the fire and sat by the water, listening to the distant croaking of frogs. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. Aaron seemed tense too, though he tried to act normal. We didn't talk about the deer. At some point, we decided to turn in for the night. We doused the fire, zipped up the tent, and lay down in our sleeping bags. The inside of the tent was stifling, the air thick with the smell of sweat and earth. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every sound outside made me flinch. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it. Footsteps, not the light, skittering kind from small animals. These were slow, deliberate, heavy. They crunched through the leaves, stopping, starting again. I held my breath, my body frozen. Aaron was awake too. I could feel him tense beside me. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent. Then the fabric moved. Just a slight press, like someone or something was running a hand along the side. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. Aaron's hand found his knife. I gripped mine too, though I had no idea what I would do with it. We stayed still, barely breathing. The pressure on the tent lifted. The footsteps started again, moving away this time. After what felt like forever, we heard the distant snap of a branch. Then nothing. We didn't move for a long time. When we finally did, we unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and peered outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint glow over the campsite. The trees stood silent, unmoving. There was nothing there. But near the tent, the ground was disturbed, fresh footprints in the dirt. Bare feet, human. We didn't sleep. We sat by the fire until dawn, knives in hand, every rustling leaf making us flinch. The second the sun started rising, we packed up our gear. Neither of us spoke much. The hike back to the truck was nerve-wracking. Every snap of a twig had me whipping my head around. I kept expecting to see someone, something watching us from the trees, but we made it back. We threw our gear in the truck, climbed in, and drove. We didn't stop until we were back in town, in the bright light of day, with people around and the comfort of civilization. Only then did we let out the breath we'd been holding. We never went back. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there that night, but I know one thing: we weren't alone. It was a late September afternoon when I arrived at Black Hollow. The day had already begun to fade, the sky turning a muted gray as the evening's chill crept in. I was a few days into a solo camping trip through the Appalachian Mountains, something I'd been planning for months. A break from the rush of life, a chance to clear my mind, and to reconnect with something simple. I thought the time alone would be good for me, just me, my gear, and the wilderness. But Black Hollow wasn't the peaceful place I thought it would be. I'd been hearing about the area from locals in the small town I passed through before reaching the trailhead. Most of them didn't speak much about it, but there was something in their eyes when they mentioned the place. Something guarded, like they were holding on to a secret. But I wasn't one to buy into local superstitions. It was just a stretch of forest, after all. It had to be, right? I parked my old truck at the base of the trail and loaded up my backpack with my tent, sleeping bag, food, and a few essentials. The hike up wasn't particularly difficult, but the forest felt different here, thicker, quieter. The trees towered above me, their leaves already starting to change to fall colors. The ground was soft beneath my boots, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. As I walked further in, I realized I hadn't passed anyone else. Not a single person. It was just me and the woods. The trail seemed to wind deeper into the heart of the forest. The further I went, the more isolated I felt. My cell phone had no service, not that I was expecting any, but the complete lack of connection made the silence feel heavier. No animals, no birds, just the occasional rustle of leaves. It was unnerving, but I pushed forward. I'd camped alone before, many times, and the woods had never bothered me. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I reached my intended campsite. a small clearing with a few scattered rocks and a decent spot for my tent. The place was perfect for a night under the stars. I set up my camp quickly, the cool air turning brisk as the light waned. There was a small creek nearby, and the sound of flowing water filled the silence. The firewood I had gathered earlier was dry, and the fire crackled to life easily. I sat by the fire, poking it occasionally to keep it going, and stared into the flames. The warmth was comforting, but the forest around me felt too still, too silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I dismissed it as nothing more than the natural paranoia that comes with being alone in a place like this. As night fell fully, the forest darkened around me, and the chill in the air grew. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and continued to stare into the fire. The crackling wood was the only sound, and I found myself listening for any other noise, any other sign that I wasn't alone. But there was nothing. Not even the wind moved through the trees. I finished my dinner, a simple meal of freeze-dried soup, and began to tidy up my campsite. As I was doing so, I noticed something odd. The ground near my tent was disturbed, like someone had recently walked through. The grass was flattened in odd patches, and the soil seemed freshly churned. I thought it was strange, but not enough to concern me. Maybe it was just the wind or an animal, I reasoned. It wasn't like there were other campers around. I hadn't seen anyone since I left the trailhead. The wind picked up as the night went on, and the fire began to die down. I piled more wood on it, trying to keep the warmth and light going. As I sat back down, I heard it, a rustling from the edge of the clearing. It was faint, but unmistakable. Something or someone was moving through the trees. I grabbed the flashlight from my pack, my heart beginning to race. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on nothing. I stood up slowly, scanning the perimeter of the campsite. The rustling stopped, replaced by absolute stillness. My breath hitched in my throat, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was just a deer or another animal. But the sound had been too deliberate, too close. I called out, though I wasn't sure why. No one answered. It wasn't until I heard the second noise that I knew I wasn't alone. A footstep, heavy and deliberate, crunched the dry leaves behind me. My body went cold. I spun around, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. The light revealed only trees, their shadows stretching long in the dark. Nothing moved. I stood there, the silence of the forest pressing in around me, and for a moment, I just stared into the darkness. The wind had stopped, and the only sound was the pounding of my heart in my chest. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized what had happened. I woke up early, the first light of dawn creeping through the trees. I had barely slept, my mind racing with the strange noises from the night before. The fire was reduced to a few smoldering embers, and the cold air nipped at my skin. I quickly packed up my things, eager to leave the uneasy campsite behind. As I stood up to roll my tent, I noticed the same strange marks in the ground, the same disturbed soil near my tent. But this time, I saw something new. Boot prints, fresh ones. Not animal tracks, but human-sized prints in the soft earth. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The rest of the hike out of the forest was tense, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves making me jump. I didn't look back. I kept moving, my mind replaying the events from the night before over and over. There was no way I could have imagined it. Someone had been out there just outside my camp, and I had no idea who or why. When I finally reached my truck, I was relieved beyond measure. I threw my gear in the bed of the truck and slammed the door shut. My hands were still shaking, and the unease that had settled in my chest refused to leave. I took one last look at the trailhead, but I didn't see anything unusual. The woods seemed as calm and peaceful as they had when I first arrived. But I knew better now. Black Hollow wasn't a place to be taken lightly. I don't know why I thought camping in a graveyard would be fun. Maybe I just wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I was just stupid. It was the fall of 1998. I had just turned 24. I lived in a small town in West Virginia, the kind of place with one grocery store, a couple of gas stations, and a lot of nothing in between. I worked at a hardware store during the day, fixing shelves and unloading boxes, and spent my nights drinking cheap beer and watching whatever was on cable. Life felt slow. I wanted something different. That's how I ended up in Black Hollow Cemetery. It wasn't a famous graveyard or anything, just an old one, mostly forgotten, with crumbling headstones and tall grass swallowing the graves. It was at the end of a dirt road, about 4 miles outside of town, surrounded by thick woods. Nobody went there. There weren't any fresh burials, hadn't been for decades. The whole place smelled like damp leaves and rotting wood. I packed light, a tent, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, some granola bars, a thermos of coffee. I didn't plan to be out there for more than a night. I parked my truck about half a mile away and walked the rest of the way in, just in case somebody saw it and decided to mess with me. The air was cold, the wind moving through the trees like a slow exhale. I set up my tent in the middle of the graveyard, right between 2 old tombstones. The names were so worn down I couldn't read them. I sat on a rock, sipped my coffee, and watched the last bit of daylight bleed out of the sky. It was quiet, too quiet. I should have left then. The first couple of hours weren't bad. I read a book by flashlight, listened to the wind, and ate a couple of granola bars. But after a while, I started to feel off. I can't explain it. It was like I wasn't alone, like something was just out of sight watching. But every time I shined my flashlight into the trees, there was nothing. Just the same dead grass, the same broken headstones. I shook it off, just my mind playing tricks on me. Then I heard it, a soft crunch in the leaves. I turned fast, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the trees. The wind picked up, shaking the branches. I held my breath. Nothing, just the woods shifting in the night. I let out a slow breath. Probably an animal, a raccoon, a fox, something small. I wasn't worried. I had a knife in my pack just in case. I went back to my book. Then I heard it again. Another crunch, closer this time. I turned again, scanning the graveyard. The flashlight beam wobbled in my shaking hand. My heart was beating fast now. The sound stopped. I listened. Silence. I forced myself to relax. Just the wind. Just an animal. Nothing to be scared of. I zipped up my tent, lay down in my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. I woke up to the sound of breathing. Deep, slow, right outside my tent. I froze. The air inside the tent felt thick, suffocating. My heart pounded against my ribs. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The breathing continued. Not an animal. Not the wind. Someone was standing just outside. I reached for my flashlight. My fingers trembled as I clicked it on. The sound stopped. I hesitated, then slowly unzipped the tent. I shined the light outside. Empty, but the grass was flattened, like someone had been standing there. I stepped out, flashlight shaking in my hand. Cold air pressed against my skin. I scanned the graveyard. Nothing. I turned in a slow circle, heart hammering. The woods were just shadows, shifting in the wind. Then I saw them, footprints in the dirt, leading from the trees, stopping right in front of my tent. I felt sick. I wasn't alone. I packed my things fast, stuffed my sleeping bag into my pack, ripped the stakes from the ground, collapsed the tent in seconds. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. I had to leave. Now, I slung my pack over my shoulder and started moving. I didn't run, I wanted to, but I didn't. I walked, fast but steady, heart pounding in my throat. The dirt path back to my truck felt longer than before. The trees pressed in on either side, black and endless. Every crunch of my boots made me flinch. Every shift of the wind made my stomach twist. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Behind me, matching my pace. I stopped. So did they. The air was too still, too quiet. I turned my flashlight toward the trees. The beam caught something, movement. A shadow. Tall. Still. Watching me. I didn't wait. I ran. I reached my truck, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. I locked the doors, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned it so hard I thought it would snap. The engine roared to life. Headlights cut through the dark. I looked up. Something stood at the tree line, just beyond the reach of the light. Tall, unmoving, watching me. I slammed the truck into reverse, spun it around, and hit the gas. Gravel sprayed behind me. I didn't look back. I drove until I saw streetlights, until I saw houses, until I was back in town, parked outside my apartment, breathing like I'd just run 10 miles. I sat there for a long time, hands clenched on the steering wheel. I never went back. I don't know what I saw. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still feel it. That same heavy silence. That same feeling like something just beyond my sight is watching, waiting, and I don't sleep.